Good morning. My name is Doris Heaston, and I'm with the Nebraska Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation Share Your Story project. Bellevue University is a sponsor of the Nebraska Vietnam Veterans Memorial Park project. I am here at the Bellevue University Military Veteran Service Center with Dennis Kelly, a veteran of the Air Force, who has agreed to share their story for the Library of Congress Veteran History Project and the Nebraska Vietnam Memorial Park Project. Also with us is Dan what?
Smareshniak.
Okay, who is
That's
joining
a tough one.
Go with that.
who is joining us to observe this interview. Good morning, Dennis.
Good morning, Doris.
How are you this morning?
Feeling great.
Okay, glad to hear it.
Every day's a good day.
You know, that's a great attitude. Let's get started with a little bit of your background. Where were you born and raised, and a little bit about your family?
Okay, I was born in Omaha at the old Emmanuel Hospital. My family at the time when I was born, my dad had just been released from the Navy. He was a World War II vet. He's one of my heroes. He saved 27 lives during World War II. And he was a petty officer, and he was in charge of forward guns on the big battleships and was an expert swimmer. And so many times he dove in the water and saved people when ships were going down. So he lost 2 ships from under him and served on 7. And so I always looked up to him. I grew up in Papillion. Most of my life, from first grade on, we lived in Papillion. And then that was because my mother was born and raised in Nebraska. And we lived in Maine for 4 years, where my sister and my brother were born. And after 4 years in Maine, my mother said, "I'm going back to Nebraska if you'd like to come with me." I think that's where I'm going to go. And he said, "Yeah, I think that's a good idea." So my dad lived in Nebraska then over 60 years, the last part of his life. And he became a Nebraskan at heart. And my funniest memories of my dad is back in the good old days when Nebraska always won in football. And we lived all over the world, but he called me wherever I was, and if they lost that one game a year or one game every other year, he'd be crying on the phone. "Oh, Dennis, I don't know how I can get through this." And I said, "Dad, the sun will come up tomorrow." It always does. But I'd love to come back to those days.
Yeah.
I'm an eternal optimist. So I grew up in Papillion, a very small town, only 1,000 people when we moved there. And when we moved away, when I went to college at Lincoln, it was probably 2,500 people. So it was the quintessential small town. And when our group, our small high school class gets together, we always remark how fortunate we were to grow up there at a time, a really good time in American history, a good safe time for kids, a good positive time. Later on, Hillary Clinton would say it takes a village, and I never liked that because it was her. I just didn't like her. But when I think back to growing up in Papillion, everybody in town knew me and knew who my family was. And that was true of every family in town, so you couldn't get in too much trouble. The party line would ring, and Joyce, "We saw your son throwing an egg in a house," or whatever. I could never, I was always in trouble, but everybody knew about it. So yeah, I had a very happy childhood, and growing up in Papillion, it was a time when the town started to grow, and it because of Offutt. And so over my high school years particularly, I started getting friends from the military, brats. And I just so admired the fact that they'd been all around and I'd been nowhere, you know. And I always thought when I grow up, that's a career I would enjoy. And I go back in 1964 I graduated high school, so my 60th reunion will be next year. I know I look only at 35, but I'm 77. Anyway, so I'd always dreamed of going to Nebraska University. In fact, I never thought about any other place. I wanted to be a weatherman, like on TV, because I'm fascinated with meteorology. But there was no meteorology school except Oklahoma. And I said, no, I'd rather die than go to Oklahoma. And nobody will.
rival.
I'll be disowned by all my family if I go to Oklahoma. So I went to Nebraska. And ROTC was mandatory at Nebraska. So I had to join something. And of course, I joined the Air Force ROTC. And there was, I think, 800 and some of us just in the Air Force ROTC, in the freshman class. And then in the sophomore class, it wasn't required, but there was still about 250. And I think all of us were looking ahead because we all wanted to get into the professional side the last 2 years because that would guarantee we'd be an officer. And my friends who didn't go to college, they were all getting drafted, and I had a deferment for college. So, and I thought, well, I'm going to go to Vietnam, but I'd rather go as an officer and fly. I wanted to fly. So that's what I did, and I was shocked when I got accepted into the professional part because they only took 30 out of the 250. I wasn't sure if I had the numbers, but I guess I did well. So then I did those 2 years, went to summer camp in Amarillo, Texas, God forbid. Just I've written stories about every part of my life, and I write for the Glenwood paper. So
Which paper?
Glenwood, Iowa, where we ended up. When I speak of Glenwood, people would say, why in the hell do I live in Glenwood? It's because when we were thinking to finally come back here to retire, we lived in Ohio forever. And one day I looked at my wife, we were in our 70s and we were both still working full time. And I said, I don't want to die and be shipped back in a box. I want to die home. And I grew up in Omaha, so the Omaha area. So 6 years ago we moved back, and I have 3 brothers that live here. Everybody, at one time we were all over the world, now we're all back. And they said, we love you, Dennis, but really you should look at Iowa. And I go, why? And they said, because it's cheaper, nicer, and you said you wanted to live in a small town again, which I did, and they said, look, Glenwood's perfect. And we looked at Blair and Plattsmouth, and we looked all around, but I really liked Glenwood. And it was a good choice for us, so we're really happy there. So that's it. And I'm close here. I'm close to Bellevue, Offutt, my brothers. I can be anywhere in Omaha in 40 minutes, which is wonderful. So, and it's just nice having the support of being near a military base. Although the reason we really wanted to be close was for medical. They used to have an actual clinic here, and all of our needs were seen there. And now over time, they're all gone, and so I get all my medical care around the Omaha area, which is the best in the country, really. Certainly the best in the Midwest. So I'm glad to be here because I feel that no matter what happens health-wise to me, I'll be taken good care of here.
Yeah.
So, well, I rambled on there. Sorry.
Hey,
This is your story.
that's a heck of a...
But we do need to go back to graduating ROTC, or finishing up with ROTC.
Well, I was commissioned a second lieutenant on the day I graduated from Nebraska University. It was a proud day for me because I was the oldest of all my cousins. So that I was always very spoiled and special, right? So everybody was there, and it was really something to be commissioned. My dad couldn't have been more proud, you know. And I always regretted he never kept a career. He got recalled for Korea, so he had 8 years of service. But my mother didn't like the military life, the moving. And we lived, I remember at one time we lived in Norfolk, Virginia. And he was enlisted, so it wasn't great. We were in a high-rise building with a fire escape. My mother was always afraid we'd fall off the fire escape. And we actually had an ice box where they brought ice. You know, we were poor as church mice, but we didn't know. We were just I was a kid. I thought it was wonderful. I thought it was exotic. And having my dad out on a ship, and when he'd be in port, we'd visit him on the ship, you know, and it was just so cool.
Yeah.
And I wonder how different my life would have been if he'd stayed in the Navy. And we lived all over the world, because I loved to travel. So anyway, I go in the Air Force, and they send me to pilot training. And that was a last minute thing. I thought I was going to be an accounting officer. My degree was in finance and economics.
Well,
why? You ask anybody, why would you get a minor in economics? You know, I always say today, I wish the entire Congress had a degree in economics. We might be better off. Anyway, so I go to pilot training at Williams Air Force Base in Arizona, which at that time was a really big center. And I'd never flown in my life except as a small child on a commercial plane. So I had no idea what I was in for, really. And the first day I was up they paired me with an instructor who weighed 300 pounds, and he had 20,000 hours of flight time. 20,000 hours. Mm-hmm. And whenever I'm sitting right here, and he's right here, and every time I'd make a mistake, he'd take his elbow and say, "You idiot." He'd just smash me. I had bruises all up and down my eyes. I said, "Geez, there's no need. Just tell me. You don't need to hit me." Anyway, I guess I wasn't that great. But I really started to get used to it, and I loved it. I loved it. And I remember the most exciting day was it was time to solo. You know, I'm thinking, will he get out? Will he really get out and let me do it? And we stop on the runway. He says, "I'm getting out." I go, "Oh God, this is," I'm so nervous. And so I took the plane off, no problem, but except I almost tipped over because I had to retrim the plane because 300 pounds just got out of the right side.
Yeah, kind of.
Oh my God, I'm going, oh Jesus, what am I doing? But anyway, I was ranked 6th in my class at the end of that phase, and there was 93 of us in the class. And then we're in the jet phase, T-37s at the time. And again, I soloed in the plane, which again, I was a bit surprised because I didn't feel, I knew what I was doing when it came to landing. Every time we come in to land, I had bad vision, but the Air Force said, "No, it's good enough," because it was Vietnam. Vietnam was going on. So they said it was good enough, but I couldn't see well. So I had bad accommodation, so when I would come in to land, I'd be like 6 feet above the runway. It looked good to me, but it wasn't. So, you know, then you slow down, you're too slow, and then bam, then you bounce, bam, again.
Oh,
and the instructor would always say, "Which landing should we log?" You know, I go, "Geez, okay." So anyway, what I didn't know until like 7 years or 8 years later, was an order came down to all the pilot trainings and said, "Get rid of half of everybody." Because Vietnam was getting near the end as far as drawing down. Remember, this is 1969. Okay, we had passed the peak of Viet. We were withdrawing now. So they were looking ahead. They knew they didn't need this many people. Well, I didn't know anything about that order. And about the time that order came down, my instructor was killed in a mid-air accident right over the field. Luckily, I wasn't with him, I guess.
Not combat related?
Yeah, I mean, it killed 3 people. It was my instructor, another student, a friend of mine, and then a kid that was soloing. He came, the solo kid came in to the field from the wrong direction. It was right over the field. So all three were killed. So myself and three other of my classmates who flew with this instructor, we would take turns with him. He flew constantly. We were all grounded because our instructor was killed. They said, well, we're going to put you back another class. We go, well, just let us fly with somebody else. We don't care. Because at that phase of flying, you need to fly a lot, 4 or 5 times a week, you know. And then the idea that you wouldn't fly for 30 days, so that was kind of crazy, I thought. So, but I didn't know this order had come down, look for people to get rid of. I was ranked 6th in the class. So I thought, well, they'll never get rid of me even if I'm blind, right? I mean, I was kind of liking this. So anyway, what happened was I go back after 30 days not flying, and I always had rides. I never was anything but good or excellent. All right, and you have excellent, good, fair, or unsatisfactory. So I go back up after 30 days, and they said, this is your practice ride before your check ride. I said, well, I need more than one practice ride. I haven't flown in 30 days. Yeah. Anyway, on my practice ride, I got all U's and F's. They said, well, you're going to give you your check ride anyway. And what did they fail me on? Landings. Landings. Well, all along they knew I couldn't land. I figured, well, over time I'll figure it out. Anyway, they called me the blind pilot. Anyway, so I got word that I was going to be washed out. I wasn't going to be held back in another class. I was going to be washed out. And all 4 of my friends, we all were treated the same. We had to stand in front of a board and argue our case, and they just looked at us like, you're wasting your breath. The decision's already been made. I was furious. And so they said, well, go to navigator school. I said, if I wanted to go to navigator school, that's what I would have signed up for initially. Right. You know, but no, you said I was going to, I was angry. So they said, well, what do you want to do? I said, just get me off the base, because I don't want to stay here and watch my friends graduate, and I need something. I need someplace. So they said, well, do you want to get a master's degree? I said, yeah. So I said, they said, well, we'll send you to missiles. You can get a master's degree where you're in missiles. And at the time I thought, well, how bad can that be? Well, I found out. So they sent me to North Dakota.
Yeah, I was going to say, you probably went to Minot. Yeah.
No, it was actually better than Minot. It was Grand Forks.
Oh, Grand Forks.
Yeah. Grand Forks, North Dakota. And it was a whole nother way of life, you know. And growing up, my family we went fishing in the summer to Minnesota, up by Fergus Falls, the Battle Lake. So I thought North Dakota would just be more of Minnesota. No, there's no trees. There was no lakes. There was nothing. It was just, anyway. So 3 years in North Dakota, I call it 3 winters in North Dakota. It cooled me down a little bit about being so mad about the pilot thing. And of course, in North Dakota, I'm meeting other people who were in missiles who had come through the same mess I did from other places. So we were kind of like a fraternity of losers. Whatever. We were not a happy group. But anyway, so after 3 years there, and I realized I still liked the Air Force. I just didn't want to do missiles forever. And I was doing really well there, and I did get my master's degree. So,
can I ask you, obviously, or I shouldn't say obviously, the degree doesn't say missiles. What would the degree be in layman terms, or that would be parlayed for?
Yeah, well, I got a Master of Business Administration, an MBA from the University of North Dakota, and I didn't quite finish it before I left there, so I finished it at Troy State, Alabama. Okay. Never saw the campus. Well, I did see the campus once, but much later than. If I'd been here, I would have done it at Bellevue University. It's a wonderful program, and so anyway, the interesting thing when you fly, though, are it doesn't matter if your degree's in political science. You train somebody to do something and they do it. And so anyway, they offered me to go to navigator school again. Dennis, your scores are so high, you're just wasting your time here, you should be flying. Yeah, well, that's what I thought a long time before, but I thought, well, all right, I'll go. So now I'm a captain. So I've been in the service now about 4 years, so I'm a captain. And I go off to navigator school, which was at Mather Air Base in California. Beautiful, wonderful. I'm back in an airplane, I'm learning to do all this stuff, and I'm thinking, I'm happy now. But I was also class commander of 90 kids, because I'm the only captain. So I could write stories about that. But we had Iranian students. That was funny because they'd never been introduced to soap, apparently. So we had a little trouble with them. But we also had Germans and Norwegians, sharper than, My joke with the German boys was, if Hitler had won the war, I'd be going to nav school in Germany.
Yeah.
But it didn't quite
Situation
work out.
would have
Didn't quite work out
reversed,
for
yeah.
them. But these
I see
were
that.
sharp people. So out of nav school was a lot of fun. We had just had our first boy, and he was a toddler there, and he was actually born in North Dakota. And I remember he was born in November, and already the snow was deep, and I built a snowman laying down with a flag holding up, it's a boy. So anyway, so we had a lot of fun there at Mather Air Base. And so I graduated again, 6th in my class. I thought, this is ironic. Not first. The 2 German boys were 1st and 2nd. Oh, they were smarter. Smart cookies. Anyway, but I graduated 6th, so I could take any plane I wanted on the list, and I decided I was a captain already, and most of the people going into flying were lieutenants. And I was already behind the power curve hours-wise. So I thought I better take a plane that will give me a lot of hours. Plus I wanted to see the world. And one of the top assignments was C-141s at Travis Air Base in California. It was just down the road, maybe an hour's drive from where I was going to school. So when I got the assignment, we were so excited. Now we're going to go down and we're going to find a house to live. And I'm thinking I'm going to be at Travis forever. So we stick built a home. And this is back in 1973, early 73. And a brand new 4-bedroom, 3-bath home in a nice subdivision. And I picked everything. It was 28,000. And I'm thinking, and this was my first house, It's amazing to me back then because the wives didn't need to work. We. But when I went in as an officer, my pay was $363 a month. That was the basic pay. And I don't remember anybody suffering on that.
Yeah.
It was equivalent to what teachers made at the time, so.
Yeah.
But you don't go in the military for the money anyway. You go in for the adventure, for me, to see the world. That was one of my big deals. So I went through my training in the C-141, which was at Altus Air Force Base, God forbid, Oklahoma. And just in the 6 weeks I was there, we had 3 tornadoes on the ground, and we're all diving for cover. Very exciting. My car was destroyed by hail that was the size of softballs. Anyway, my beautiful car. Anyway, got it repaired. Anyway, so the training involves flying all around the world to see what it's like, what the routes are like. Excuse me. Take a drink here. So we're living in Vacaville, California, Travis Air Base, and I was so excited. I just loved what I did. And you get on that plane, you really weren't sure where you'd end up. You know, we kind of had an idea, and I was spending 3 or 4 days every month in Hawaii, at Waikiki, and the strategic flight cruise. We stayed at commercial hotels. We were treated like airline people, and we're staying at the same hotel as TWA and Northwest Orient, and
Yeah, remember that? TWA.
wonderful stuff. But once you got past Hawaii, it started getting worse, because this was the Vietnam drawdown. It wasn't the big part of the Vietnam War, it was the nasty end. And our mission at Travis was to support primarily Southeast Asia. That was our primary job. And so I wheedled myself into a job as the squadron scheduler. So I was in charge of who went where. It's pretty busy. And so I would strategically schedule myself to be on flights that were going maybe somewhere new, somewhere unique. And I wanted to get in country and see what was going on in Vietnam. That fascinated me. But once you saw, you didn't want to be there. But I felt compelled to help with that as I could. Many of the missions there were grim, but they were grim all over the world. No matter where we went, I saw people die in front of me in Ethiopia, just dropping dead from starvation. We evacuated people out of typhoons. We dropped food to refugees. We had a lot of interesting missions around the world. But what brings home to you is how lucky I was that I was an American. Because when we went somewhere, we had that big flag on the tail. In some places we go, they say, well, don't wear your flight suit. That'll just aggravate people. But I say, but it's kind of hard to know that we're not American, right? We're flying a massive plane with a big American flag on the tail, right? So we go to like Saudi Arabia, so we'd wear cowboy boots and cowboy hats. Try to look not too American, right? So we always had fun. But yeah, Vietnam, we didn't stay overnight in Vietnam because of our plane. They didn't want that plane shot at or ruined, and we were shot at sometimes, and sometimes we'd find little holes in the plane. But we tried to be careful going in there. We'd go in only in daytime, and we'd do a high pattern down, so they couldn't shoot at you when you're coming in on those long approaches, you know. And when we took off, we'd basically be empty of cargo. So we go, it was pretty scary stuff. So if you were in the back, it was really scary. In the front, it was just fun.
Yeah.
So we didn't stay there overnight. We always stayed in Thailand. So I certainly saw every base in Thailand over and over and over. In Vietnam, we typically went into Tan Son Nhut, the big base near Saigon, and sometimes Bien Hoa, which was fairly close by. And once I went to Da Nang. But they really didn't want our plane in Da Nang. It was too big, too showy. But we carried a lot of cargo, so on almost all the flights out of Tan Son Nhut coming back, we had bodies on board. And that always bothered me a lot. And I was 20, this is 1974, so I'm 27, and I'm thinking, all those body bags, they were kids, you know, and it bothered me. So when we take off, I would go back and sit with the bodies until we got to back to the Philippines. At the Philippines, they would take the bodies, and the mortuary officers picked them up, and then they would do all their preparation, put them in a casket, and then on our flights back to the U.S., we might have a casket or two in the back. But then they would have an escort from the USAF, somebody from their unit perhaps, to take them all the way back. So those memories are always with me, and particularly when I see on the news young people being brought back today from war zones. That I find that disturbing. At least they're treated well. There's a lot of ceremony and so forth. But back in Vietnam, they were black body bags. It just didn't seem respectful at all. And it was just such a waste, the war. And you remember in Vietnam, nobody wanted us in Vietnam, you know. So there was a real anti-military feeling, you know. So you know, when you didn't really talk about it. Nobody wanted you to talk about it.
Yeah.
And when you traveled commercially and you were on active duty, they say, well, never travel in your uniform. Always travel in civilian clothes. It's so different today, because I love today. I'll see young kids at the airport and they're on their way here or there, and I always go up and shake their hand, thank them for being patriotic and serving their country, you know. Because we didn't get any thank yous then. There was a real anti-military bias, like it was our fault, you know, and that always bothered me. I always said if the Congress was made up of retired military, we'd have less wars, I think. There would be a little less. It just bothers me to watch TV today and everybody's, well, we gotta drop bombs on Iran. We gotta make this World War III. There's such a rush to do that, and they forget about the people that'll be sacrificed for whatever that effort is, you know. So, but anyway, I got to do a lot with the C-141. One of my funniest stories of the 141, while I was in Thailand, we would land there and stay overnight, but they didn't have maintenance facilities there, except at Utapao, the big base, which was over by the ocean. But we were doing a lot of other little things at Udorn and Ubon and Tonsanut, or not Tonsanut, NKP, which was Non Kong Phanom. We just called it NKP. So anyway, we come in there. We were at Udorn, and we lost all the metal off the flap on the left side of the plane. Well, you need your flaps to land into. So we go, well, we can't really take off well without that trailing edge of our left wing. So our crew chief was an inventive guy, and he found some big rolls of duct tape, and we created a new wing surface from duct tape.
Wow.
On that left wing.
A lot of layers of duct tape.
And you know, the Air Force is always curious. What are we doing? You know, and are you having trouble there? No, we've sorted it out. So as soon as we took off, of course, all the duct tape went off the wing, but it got us off the ground. But we didn't want to spend another night there, so we wanted to go to Utapao, get this plane repaired. So then in our approach into Utapao, we lost hydraulic pressure in the plane, which is a serious issue. So it means you're not sure about the landing gear, you're not sure about the flaps, and nothing works too well. So you got to land at like 170 miles an hour instead of 135. But they have a long runway. So anyway, we got it on the ground, and the plane's all ripped apart on the left side. And they're going, how did that happen? We don't know. We don't know. Anyway, so we had to spend a few days there in Utapao to fix our wing. Honest to God. But yeah, that was a wonderful plane, and I got to see the whole world. So being the scheduler, like I said, I scheduled myself into so many fun deals, but they weren't all fun because you never quite knew what things were gonna, like that time we went to Ethiopia. Jeez, had no idea what we were doing there. And we land, and we were at Asmara, which is now a separate country. Eritrea, I think it's called Eritrea. At the time, it was a rebel part of Ethiopia, and there was a war going on there. And we were bringing in a satellite tracking machinery for the Navy's satellite tracking spot, which was on a mountain in the middle of this war-torn area. And we're thinking, this ain't a good idea. Who's going to protect us there? What are we going to find there? So we land, and the runway was 8,500 feet above sea level. And with a big plane, you're not used to that, landing at thin air like that. So we're in the books or trying to figure out what speeds we have to do. And the first time we came around, I had two pilots that were just obstinate, and they're saying, no, you're reading it wrong. So we come in there, and we were so fast we would have gone right off the runway at the other end. So we had to go around, and I said, now maybe you'll listen to me. I was a damn good navigator. I was usually the smartest guy on the crew. So anyway, we landed properly. But when we come to a stop, tens of thousands of people rush the plane because they think we're full of food. They don't know that we're full of electronic gear. So we gave them our food. We had little box lunches, but there was thousands of people. And some of them were just dropping dead. They were just skeletons, like you saw in the newsreels after World War II of the Holocaust. So I pray to God I'd never see that again. Never see that again. But when people in this country complain about anything, I say, you don't know how lucky you are. There was many of those trips I'd come back and I'd kiss the ground when I got home. I say, thank God I was living here. How lucky we are. How fortunate we are. It's not perfect, but go live somewhere else and then complain, you know. But I have been lucky. I've seen a lot, and I've seen a lot of good too, a lot of good. So, but that was my life in C-141s. I saw the world and saw the bad parts and the good parts. And I mean, even in 141s, it's hard to imagine it today, but Iran was our friend.
Yeah.
And we would go there, and they just treat us like royalty. They give us a private car, and they take us to the bazaar so we could buy Persian carpets, and stayed at the Intercontinental Hotel downtown, very high-rise, beautiful place. They couldn't be nicer to us, you know. So and now here we are today, you know.
The enemy of your enemy is your friend.
Yeah.
Soviet Union, Iran, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to take you back to Vietnam and those trips. In your interview sheet, you talked about prisoners and some of the young people, because I think that's important.
That was a dark thing for me, certainly for all the people involved. It was in our squadron, those were called the ball and chain flights. And you're wondering in your mind, ball and chain, what does that mean? Well, you find out quick enough, all right? So our trip out to Vietnam would be normal, and we're doing our normal mission, but then on the return, it would be a special flight. The whole back end, instead of cargo, was people. All young GIs shackled to their seats. Maybe 100 of them. And you're wondering, what did they do? But then when you look at these kids, their eyes are blank. They all were drug overdose issues, mostly. And they didn't know what was going on with them. And some of them they just looked deranged, kind of, you know. And it bothered me that they were shackled to their seats, because what if we went down? I think of that scene from Ben-Hur where they're all shackled to the oars, and then they get rammed by another ship and they can't get loose to it. I knew the C-141 could float, theoretically. We've never had one actually try it. But theoretically, if you put it down properly, like Sully did there in the Hudson River, but if you're shackled to your seats, who's got that key? I didn't like this. I didn't like it. And, but, jeez. And all I could think of was, it was like a whole back end full of high school kids. Their lives are over. They're ruined. They're medically ruined. Who knows what their criminality might have been, why they're, you know. But to treat people like this, I thought, you know, of course they say, well, we got to protect them from themselves, and we can't, you know. And I can understand it, but still. Anyway, we took them to the Naval Air Center in Chicago, north of Chicago, and ironically, my youngest son went there to go through basic training with the Navy. That's another story. Anyway, so, but that's where we took them. And then I wonder for years, and I wonder what today, what happened to those people? What happened to those kids? Did they get them in rehab? Did they fix them, some of them? Or are they still in hospitals or institutions? Or did they die of some other reason? Because now they would all be 70 or so, maybe a little older. But I was young then. I was, in my lower 20s, and I was successful and I was happy, and I'd see a whole plane load of people shackled down. It was just disgusting, the whole concept of what was going on there.
So no one explained to you, we have this group, they've all been convicted of drug offenses or violent crimes or anything like that. So you didn't have any idea.
Why? No, I didn't know that. I didn't know the background.
Or so-and-so is in charge of this group.
Well, there was military police in charge, and there was medical people too on board, of course. And we had other flights that were called aerovacs. And I enjoyed doing those because we were there. That was at least a very positive thing. We're taking people who had been injured, they've been stabilized, they were able to make a long flight, and now we were taking them back to the United States to finish their rehabilitation. And there you had the whole back of the plane was set up as a hospital, basically. And so you had doctors and nurses and all kinds of medical people. And I remember on one of those flights, our pilot was a reservist. He usually flew for the airlines. So I don't think he was maybe the best to be flying the C-141 because he didn't have enough time, So we're coming into Hickam Air Base, which is actually, you share the big runway there with the International Airport at Honolulu. And the new runway is built out into the ocean, so it's all built up land. And he come in, and of course I'm sitting right behind him because I'm the navigator. And he was an old colonel in the Air Force, but he was an airline pilot. And I said, "Sir, you're coming in too steep." "No, I got it, Dennis. You're coming in too steep." We hit the nose wheel first, which I thought was impossible with that plane. So we go, bum, 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 bum. And we hit twice, and of course in the back it was pandemonium, because IVs are breaking loose, and oh my God. and then it takes like 10 minutes to taxi back over to Hickam. You go through all this way. It's because the base is a long ways from the runway. And he was very quiet along the way. Finally, he said, because he knew he had screwed up. And the chief and the medical people in the back, the doctor had come up and said, "What in the hell are you doing up?" And luckily nobody was hurt, but it was a mess. Anyway, so finally the pilot says, "What time did we land, Dennis?" Because I was in charge of. I said, "Which one?" And it reminded me of my pilot training.
Which landing should I log, right?
No, but I mean, every flight, you were gone for 7 or 10 days. You got out into the system, you weren't sure where you would end up, and I remember one flight, our second son was due to be born on October 28th or so, and around the 15th they said, "Well, Dennis, can you squeeze in one more flight? It's just an easy out and back to Vietnam." "Oh yeah, I got time to do that. I'll get back before the baby's born," right? Well, we got to Guam, and our pilot, who was a reservist, he had a heart problem. So they had to air evac him out. Well, we're stuck. Our rest of our crew is there. We don't have a head pilot.
Right.
They said, "Oh, we'll get another pilot out to you in a few days." Well, 7 days later, and the whole 7 days we're we're treated like commercial people. We're down at the Okura Hotel on the Tumon Bay in Guam. It's just gorgeous. And they're paying me to do this. I always found it remarkable. I was getting paid every
Benefits
day.
to it.
Yeah, the extra pay.
And what was your wife thinking about this?
Well,
she wasn't too happy.
Well, yeah.
She is in her last stages
Well,
of
yeah,
labor.
she's within days of having a baby, and she's calling the squadron every day. "Where's Dennis?" He said he'd be home. And they said, "We don't know, Mrs. Kelly. He's somewhere out in the system." Well, in those days there was no internet. This is 1974. And I'm on Tumon Bay, and I'm thinking, "Gee, I should be home. I should be home." And
As you're having a cocktail by the pool?
well, we could swim right up to the bar. Right up to the bar from snorkeling out in the reefs. You swim. It's just so amazing. Anyway, so, and they say, "Woma, we don't know. We don't know where he's at,"
Duty calls, right?
But I did get home 2 days before Mark was born.
Oh, that's good.
But I was gone 14 days, not 7. So, but yeah, but every flight was something unusual, something that I could write a story about, really.
May I ask a question about that hospital run? Were there C-141s fitted out to be, I want to call them hospital planes, but to be used as medevac?
Yeah.
So that it wasn't just any C-141?
No,
There
they
was
had
specific-
special planes that they were, so they wouldn't have to redo it every time.
Right, okay.
At the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio,
Yeah.
they have one.
Right, Pat.
They have a model of one of those there, and they also have the C-141 there that brought the last prisoners out of Vietnam. I knew a lot of those people in my career who had been POWs, and I always thought about one of my friends was there 7 years, and I went through survival training like everybody else. And when I went through it, it was at Fairchild Air Base in Washington State. And we're up there in April, and there was still snow on the ground. And we're in our survival time out in the wilds. And at the end of that thing, you're captured. You think you're being saved, but you're being captured, and now you're in a POW camp yourself. It's kind of to get you ready for anything. And they've got me in a box about twice as high as this table It's like a little shipping crate. And I'm in that for 24 hours. And I'm not claustrophobic. But another day in there, and I would have been for sure, I might have gone crazy. But I would keep thinking, this is not real. This is a drill. This is a training situation. I did think our trainers were having too much fun at our expense. They were really into it, you know. But then you think about, what if somebody was a POW, really?
Yeah.
Now, I didn't know any at that time. It was after I left the 141 and I was doing other jobs that I would meet these people who had been released. And I was always sad I wasn't on the crew of one of those planes that brought those guys out. But I was out of the C-141 when that occurred. I was in F-4 training then. So
when did you leave the C-141?
in the fall of 1974.
Okay.
Now the Vietnam War was still going, but it was winding down a lot. Each time we went there, there was less stuff. But the crisis was coming because you didn't know what was going to happen at the end. And I was in F-4 training at Homestead Air Base, Florida, when the end came, when the embassy fell. And I've read books about all of that, and it's harrowing what happened there at the end. It reminds me of what happened at the end in Afghanistan, to a degree. All the people who helped us, they wanted to get out because they knew they wouldn't be good for them. And then you saw what happened in Southeast Asia after the war ended, the killing fields of Cambodia and so forth. And everybody who had been loyal to America suffered greatly because we couldn't get them out. But those scenes, you know, and then there was a C-5 that crashed full of orphans. And at that time I thought, this is the lowest point in American history. We could never go lower. But then we did go lower when we went out of Afghanistan. So that's why I'm angry about that. But
The Iraq withdrawal led to ISIS.
yeah, oh yeah, definitely.
I was in Iraq, so trust me, I know.
I don't know. I've had jobs in the Air Force where I was kind of near the top, and I saw what was going on as far as planning goes. And I even had a job once where I knew who would be assassinated somewhere else. And then I'd see it on the news later, and I go, So I've seen it from the top and the bottom. The country and the military, they're not run by idiots. There's a lot of smart people. But sometimes I just think what looks good at the beginning sometimes doesn't work out so well. If you could look in the future further, you know, but you're expecting a lot of everybody. You know, we're just human beings, and people do make mistakes, there's no doubt. And you just hope the mistakes are manageable. But I mean, I remember one job I was in, I was doing military planning, and my plan was there was two big plans. One is to win the war in Europe, and the other is to win the war in Asia. And at the time, this is during the Reagan era, we had a military so big and so strong and so pervasive around the world that we thought we could win simultaneous world wars on two continents without any problem at all. So I'm at a planning conference at the Pentagon, and I'm representing the Tactical Air Command at the time, all the fighter jets. And one of the guys I'm working with he's representing Military Airlift Command and all the airlift
Yeah.
which I had some background with that.
Sac, tack, and mac.
Yeah. So we're looking at this plan, and I wasn't that familiar with the plan was this thick. It's pages and pages and pages of logistical stuff. And I'm trying to study it and figure it out. And the Mac guy says, Dennis, do you realize there's 100 C-141 loads out of Holloman Air Base, New Mexico, on day one of the war? He said, how in the hell do I have 100 different pickups of C-141s? He said, we only have 212 of the planes in the whole world. And I didn't I didn't go in, he thought I would laugh or something. And I just looked at him, I said, if you do one every 90 seconds, you can work it out. You just go, but soon enough you realize all of our plans didn't work. They were unworkable. Nobody had ever sat down and actually deconflicted. Everybody just said, well, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And nobody asked who does it, right? Yeah. So somebody wrote down that plan that there was going to be 100 planes loading at one base on one day without ever asking, how does this happen?
Yeah.
So then for 3 years, I worked with groups that we made these work. We made them realistic, And I'd have a job where I'm talking to 45 3- and 4-star general officers from all around the world, different commands, different services. And I'm telling them, your plans don't work. And I was a major. And I'm telling them, your plans don't work.
You did the right thing.
And I'm thinking, how long can I live? How long can I live, But they just go, okay. And I thought, so anyway, we made progress on this. So, it's a big, complicated system. And when I watch the news today, and we've got people in Congress and they're saying, well, we should do this, they don't know. They don't know any more than I know. And they're telling Israel, well, this is what you should do. No, they don't know. I try to think, there's so many, it bothers me when I look at college campuses and people demonstrating against Israel. Mm-hmm. Well, they have a right to defend themselves, but not doing anything apparently. I don't know. And my comment would be, well, if Cuba just launched a strike into Florida and killed 40,000 people in the Miami metropolitan area, 40,000, mm-hmm. then we'd have the equivalent of what happened just recently in Israel.
Yeah.
So what would our reaction be to that? We just turn the other cheek?
Restraint.
Well,
No, we know, but okay.
You don't know. So, we live in a dangerous world. We've always lived in a dangerous world. And you just hope the people in charge are up to the task. That's what I hope.
Deterrence is what we hope for, right?
But I don't have great confidence.
Defined by weakness.
I don't have great confidence now of leadership, which is sad, because we need good leadership. We always do, always need it. So anyway, I finished my C-141 days, and I was upset that I had to leave the C-141. I was just really getting into what I was really enjoying doing, really enjoyed. But the military is, for an officer, is as soon as you figure out what you're doing, you move. You're never allowed to get really, really good. You got to move. So they said, well, you haven't been on a remote tour. I said, My whole last 2 years I've been remote. I've been all over the world. They said I don't count. So you have to go away from your family permanently for a year. So I go, okay. So how do we do that? They said, well, we have this exchange program with TAC where you would go fly a fighter for a year and then you'll come back to MAC.
TAC.
The
Explain.
Tactical Air Command.
Yeah,
Tactical Air
TAC and
Command.
MAC. Strategic Air
We
Command.
need it for explain.
No, that's fine. Tactical Air Command. And now it's called Air Combat Command.
Yeah.
They've changed it.
ACC.
But at the time, so Tactical Air Command was headquartered then at Langley, Virginia. So anyway, they said, well, where will I do this? They said, well, you'll go to Homestead Air Base in Florida, and that's where you're going to learn to fly an F-4s as a backseater, because I'm a navigator. Well, I'd never been in a fighter aircraft. I'm used to slow and even, and the life of an airline crew, right? So a lot of adventure, but straight and level, pretty much. We never did loops or outside things. No, we didn't do that. So I get down to Homestead, and after a couple of days of instruction in the classroom, all right, we're going out for your first flight. Oh, this is so exciting. Well, they put me in the back seat of a plane I'd never been in my life, and I got a pilot who just wants to have fun. I'm going to show you how this thing can work, and we're doing outside loops, and right away I got sick, and I got my little bag, and I throw up in the bag, and he says, "Are you okay?" I said, "I am now," because once it's out, you're fine. So anyway, after we land, he says, "Is that too much for you?" And I said, "No, let's do it again tomorrow." So I didn't get sick again. It just, you had to get that out of your system. But what excitement to be in a fighter aircraft. And people would say, "What do you do, Dennis?" I say, "Well, I fly F-4s." I just go, like I was a rock god. I couldn't be more amazing. I flew fighter aircraft. And it was amazing. And so my first assignment, and I thought would be my only assignment, was 1 year, let's go to Korea, South Korea. And I'm going to be away from my wife and my kids. My youngest son was 6 months old. My oldest son was 3.5 years old. My older son. So the older son's thinking, after I'm gone a few weeks, they must have got divorced or something. Where's Dad? Where is Dad? The little one, he doesn't know what's going on. He's 6 months old. But I'm not there for my youngest son to learn to walk. That was a hard year for me. And again, this is 1975, 76. There's no internet. If you make a phone call overseas, it's difficult. I brought my wife back here so she would be near her parents in Omaha and my parents in Papillion. So I bought a house in Papillion for her, and so she'd have support. The day we bought our house, we're in there, the furniture's arrived, and I go, "We don't have insurance." So we call the State Farm guy in Omaha. He comes down. And that was the day the Omaha tornado destroyed the middle part of Omaha. So we're in the house, the sirens start, he's just writing up the contract, the sirens start blowing, the sky turns green, the hail's coming down, huge hailstones. And he says, "I better get back to my office," which happened to be at 74th and Pacific. So he got back like 5 minutes before the tornado destroyed his office and his car, and he said later, he said, I should have stayed at your house.
To win.
So a couple of days later, I'm taking off from Omaha to go to Korea on a commercial aircraft. And we bank over Omaha as we head west. And you can see the scar right up. Oh God,
Yeah.
That's horrible.
That was April of 75, wasn't
Yes, yeah. So I'm off to Korea for a year. So I'm going to get to see the bicentennial in Korea. Anyway, so yeah, so I was, you know, when you're gone when I was gone in MAC, I was gone for 7 days, 10 days, or whatever. When I was on alerted missiles, you're away from your family a lot. And when I retired after 20 years, I added it up. I was away from my family 4 years total. When you add up all the days I was not home. 4 years out of 20. You know, and who would ask somebody to do that?
It's a lot.
If you knew ahead of time, you know.
Big commitment.
At the time it was all going on, it seemed kind of normal. Like even the remote tour, you knew everybody had a remote year. And some people had more than one. You know, I would always think about the SAC guys, the Strategic Air Command, the B-52s. They were flying into Vietnam, and they would go out to Guam and stay there 6 months, and then they go back. Then they go back for 6 months, and they go back. But they wouldn't leave them there a day over 6 months, or it counted as a remote tour. So they just punished them like that by keeping them on these 6-month things. So I never got that. And I thought, well, I love the F4. By the time I finished training, I'm thinking, this is so exciting. I'm doing this job. I wasn't happy being away, but everybody else was in the same deal. I'm in a squadron with 36 guys. We're all away from our family. Virtually all of them married. Only a handful were single. We're all, senior lieutenants, captains, majors, and we're all away from our family. But we made the best of it. We had a lot of fun there. We were doing an important job. And what I enjoyed being in Korea was the Korean people loved us. They were happy we were there. It wasn't this, oh, if you go off base, you're in trouble. They loved America. And if I was down in the town, in Kunsan there, I could be the only American in sight, and I never felt in any danger, you know. And but it was a good life. Excuse me. So when the time was over in Korea, I decided I think I'd like to stay in F4s. I don't want to go back to MAC because I had the option to go back and do the boring stuff, because it was boring compared to fighters.
Yeah,
I mean, my God, the stories I could write about fighters.
Operational missions. Yeah.
Well, it was exciting. It was exciting. And I was the top ranked navigator in my flight. We were called Weapons Systems Officers, or WIZOs. I like WIZO. I just thought that was cool. I'm a WIZO. It sounded like I've always prided myself. My joke all through my life was, ask me anything, I know everything. I'm very horribly egotistical and drive my wife just totally crazy. So as you get older, though, you realize you're not as smart as you think you are. You know, you just have a tiny little piece. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. So we decided that we would stay in fighters, and I asked Woma, I said, they're going to give me my first choice coming out of this remote, wherever we want to go in the world where they fly F4s. So I gave her the list. She said, let's go to Europe, because she'd always wanted to go. And so we looked at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge in England, and we went there, and we had 3 happy years there. Wonderful. Every aspect of the job was great. I became the first flight commander backseater in Europe, which was a big honor for me. And to be a flight commander, I was the first one who wasn't a pilot to be a flight commander. So everything was just wonderful there. And we put our oldest son, who started school, we put him in English schools. And that was quite an experience for him, but I didn't want to have him on a bus all day going down to the base. We lived a long ways from the Air Force Base. And the English school was extremely good, but he was the only American in his class. And so he got beat up every day because his accent was wrong, you know. So he's a smart boy, very smart, much smarter than me. And he figured out quickly the English accent and how it should be done. And he come home from school, he'd say, "Mummy, could I have a sweetie, please?" And then, of course, we moved back to the States later, and he gets beat up constantly because he's sounds like a little bloke, you know. So he had to relearn English. Honest to God. They always say England and America are two countries separated by the same language. And it does take a while to figure it all out.
Yeah.
But I love the English, and we still have good friends there. And that was just 3 wonderful years. And then from there we stayed with F-Force. We went to North Carolina. And there I was the first navigator who was a chief of standardization for the wing. So I gave the check rides to the pilots, and that was pretty exciting. I failed the wing commander once on a check ride, and I was a little concerned in the back of my mind what he might do to me because I embarrassed him by failing him. And later he said, "I'm glad you did that, Dennis. That's what I deserved." I go, "Oh, thank you, sir." Anyway.
It's an eye-opener, right?
And then later I ended up, after that, of course I have to do a staff job, so I ended up at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia as a staff officer, and that's where I was doing all that planning work.
Mm.
And the fascinating part of my career there really was I ended up being the executive officer for General McPeak, who later became the whole chief of staff of the Air Force. But then he was 2-star. He was chief of plans, and I did all his briefings and all that, and that's how I got in front of all these people. And I never considered myself a great speaker, but apparently he saw something in the way I did things that he just liked. And he'd say, "I'm going to put you in bad situations, but I'll always be behind you," which gave me some confidence, you know. And if I'd known he was going to be in charge of the entire Air Force, I might have stuck with him because he wanted me to go with him as his assistant when he got his 3rd star. And he was going back to Hawaii to the PACCOM headquarters, Pacific Command. And I didn't want to go there because I knew my kids would have to be in different weird schools. And
Yeah.
I said, no, I wanted to do something different.
We're getting close to the time limit here, so I want to ask a few more questions.
Surely.
So where did you, was that your last assignment then?
No, I went, I wanted to teach college. I had these weird dreams of things I wanted to do. And General McPeak said, you'd rather teach college than go with me? I go, yes. So anyway, my dream was to teach at a university and then go teach in high school, because I just like working with kids. And so he made that happen for me, and I became an instructor. I ran the ROTC at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. Yeah. So then that brought me to my retirement. I remember when I was promoted to lieutenant colonel, I was still working for General McPeak, and one day he called me to his office. He said, "I got a project for you," which he had 2 or 3 a day. I was his slave, basically. So anyway, I go down there, surprise, and the room is packed with people, and he had a cake and the whole deal. And I was touched by that he would gone to all that work for me. And my wife's there, my boys are there, and my boys at the time, I think they were 13 and 10. And Mark, my youngest, he says, and his boys were named Brian and Mark. and his wife was named Wilma, just like my wife. And she was a realtor, my wife was a realtor. I thought the whole thing was weird, but we had a good relationship. So he looks at Mark and he says, "Aren't you proud of your dad, Mark? He's going to be a general someday, just like me." And you know what Mark said to this day, 10-year-old. And I always told my boys, be honest. Never tell a lie, because you'll have to figure it out later. He says to General Peak, "Oh no, sir, he's getting out at 20. Jesus. I thought I was going to melt right there. I'm going to melt. And he says, "Oh, Mark, your dad hasn't made that decision, has he?" He looks right at me. I said, "Well, it's on my mind, sir." So I had to be honest with him. But because he had told me, he said, if you go to ROTC to teach at our Reserve Officer Training Corps, you will never make full colonel. There's no promotion route there. And I thought, that's fine. But had I stayed with him, I might have followed him up. I had no idea he'd be in charge of the whole thing. But the funny things when I worked for him was he knew he was going to be there. Inside his briefcase, he had 4 stars. And I'd always tease him, because I was on a first name basis with him. I called him General. I always just said General. And I was Dennis. Anyway, and when we were working together on projects, we were in civilian clothes. So it was a very relaxed atmosphere. And I'd say, the odds of you making 4 stars is like 1 in a million. It just ain't gonna happen. He said, "Well, I think it will." But he had planned out the whole future of the Air Force when he was a 2-star. He showed me the new uniform he designed. He said, "What do you think?" I go, "No, geez, no." I said, "That you want to look like airline people. You don't want to look like airline pilots, do we?" But it had all those bars on the, I said, he said, "I'm sorry you don't like it, Dennis." And then later in my retirement, when people find out I worked for McPeak, they said, "It's your fault. You gave him all those ideas." I go, no, I tried to talk him out of it. Contrary. But no, my 4 years teaching, or 3 years teaching ROTC, that was unbelievable.
Did you do that after you retired?
No, in the Air Force, I ran a university program. And I commissioned about 120 officers during that 3-year period.
Okay. But when you fully retired from the Air Force...
Then I did teach high school ROTC. I started a new unit in Ohio. It was called Tecumseh High School. It was a suburb of Dayton.
Okay.
And I did that for 3 years. And all my friends at the university, when I told them I was going to go teach high school, they said, no, don't do that. You'll be so sorry. But nobody could talk me out of it. It was my dream. I have a dream. So after 3 years, I realized my dream was a nightmare. Public school, at that school, they didn't care about the kids. They just wanted to push them through, and and I cared about each kid. And I made a difference in a lot of kids. So one of the boys I had, he was in the hall the first day I went to the high school. He saw me in uniform. He was so excited. He says, Colonel, I'm going to be in your class, and I said, great. He's a little sophomore, I went to his retirement ceremony recently at Wright Pad, full colonel, and I had a lot of those.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice, yeah.
So he was a kid no teacher encouraged, not one. And I got him a $500 grant from the American Legion to pay for his books and stuff so he could start school. His parents wouldn't give him a dime. So I sponsored him his first year of college, and then he just took off. I knew he could do it. He just, he wasn't a great student in high school. A lot of kids are late bloomers, and he just had some little spark I saw. So that's how I retired. But I had 20 years, 20 wonderful years. I do it all again. not every day was perfect, as you heard, but most days were really wonderful.
Do you ever get together with that unit from the Vietnam days? Ever have reunions?
No, that squadron has been disbanded. They no longer have C-141s. There is no 86 Strategic Airlift Squadron existing. I don't run into those people, really. It's kind of weird. The ones I keep track of are friends I made. I was in fighter aircraft 8 years, and you kind of keep up with that crowd. But I have a lot of Air Force friends, retires, and it's nice to be back here at Offutt area. Over the years, I would have many friends, they would get assigned to Offutt, and they knew I was from Nebraska, and they come, Dennis, my God, we're being sent to the moon. What the hell's out in Nebraska, you know? And I tell them, you're gonna love it. You're gonna love it. The people here are amazing. And wouldn't you know, everyone who was assigned here, they came back here to retire.
Mhm.
They loved this place. And so I'm glad I told them to stay, you know. But you see for yourself, it's a wonderful place, you know. And we lived in Ohio for 33 years
Wow.
before we came back here. And people in Ohio, it's Midwest too, people are nice there. But here is a special level above that. You know, it's people. I love it when I go down to Lincoln and you see people from all over the country who are coming here to play football against us or whatever. And they were all wearing the bright purple of Northwestern University last weekend.
Yeah.
And I say, welcome to Nebraska. I hope you enjoy your visit here. You know, and they do. And we lived in Ohio all those years, and the first time Ohio State, all our friends from Ohio State, they come out to Lincoln and they come back and they say, my God, we've never been treated that nice anywhere. Nebraska people are really special. I said, that's what we're famous for.
Before our time runs out, is there anything you would like to say or finish up with as a final comment, summing up your career, your wartime service, anything,
Well,
just a closing remarks?
Jeez. My whole life has been, if I knew it was going to happen that way, I'm not sure I would have done that or whatever. I had no idea what my military career would be. I mean, my 4 years of college, I thought I was going to be an accountant. And suddenly I'm in pilot training and I'm going, wow, this is amazing. And then I'm in missiles. My God, what am I doing here? And but I realized the Air Force was really a cool environment to be in. I loved it. And then my flying career as a backseater or as a navigator, it opened the world to me, and I saw the world. And the more you see, the more you appreciate what you're doing for this country. I recommend the military as a career to all young people who are they don't know for sure what they want to do. I say you should go enlist. You should learn a trade. You should figure it out. Then they'll pay for you to go to college if that's your dream. I would do it all over again. And I will say, I'll finish on this. I had 17 friends who died serving their country in aircraft accidents. 17. More than once I thought I'll be one. A lot of scary times in fighter aircraft, particularly when I'm an instructor and well, Dennis, you can fly with this kid. He's got 20 hours in the plane. I go, no. Anyway, honest to God, they're hyperventilating and we're going to die. And I'm saying, no, we're not going to die. It's not on my schedule today. So, honest to God. So I got through a lot, but I had 17 friends who did it. And if you could bring any of those 17 back, they'd say, I would do it again. They died doing what they loved. They do it again. It's a great life. It was a great life for me. And it's still a great life. I enjoy the whole thing of being retired. I've been retired a long time. I retired when I was 42. My wife says, now what do we do? I said, well, I don't want to live in a van down by the river. I want to keep working. I'm 42. So anyway, I've had a good life, and it's enabled me to do a lot. And we had 14 exchange students from around the world, and we've traveled to see all of them, our families. And so anyway, it's been good. I think that's a good place to end, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been
Well, thank
very
you.
interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah.